The last time I voted was when Joe Biden was primaried, a fact I am not ashamed of, and I am more than happy to explain why. For most people still subscribing to the dominant narrative, black people are seen as responsible for our own oppression, and we are repeatedly required to prove our humanity. To a certain extent, the respectability politics within the black community is almost stronger than the dominant narrative, except that it lacks true authority. However, there has been an obsession with voting being linked to our inherent survival, and after March 2020, I am disgusted with the entire process. Mathematically, I am disgusted with the premise that 14.5% of the population is responsible for fighting against everyone else, and that even if none of us were imprisoned and we all came back from overseas, we would be nowhere near the majority. People target black people because they chose to, and I will aggressively defend that bigots have no authority to tell us to submit to a system that hates us. During the 2020 primaries, there was a wide range of presidential hopefuls, and I was truly impressed by the people I had in front of me, except Joe Biden. He was running for president because he felt entitled to run the country, in the same way that Ruth Bader Ginsburg felt entitled to remain on the Supreme Court when Barack Obama asked her to step down so that there would be an opportunity for somebody else. Honestly, her selfishness made me lose faith in the system long before the fascist oligarchy was officially in place, and lo and behold, it screwed everyone over as she was replaced by a Republican sycophant, which could have been entirely prevented. I truly wish that selfish creep had been alive to see the reversal of Roe v. Wade and see what she had done for all women in the empire, thanks to her selfishness. For those who thought Merrick Garland was supposed to be some kind of savior, I could care less, because once he got into power, he enjoyed his power and money, and further undeserved reputation that made sure Trump came back into office to hurt people worse than before. Biden built his reputation with younger generations by being linked with Barack Obama because none of the younger folks were interested in giving someone from the World War II era being anywhere near the White House. Proximity to blackness often gives undeserving people opportunities which they would have missed, because thanks to the rise in awareness for black equality, there were many people grabbing onto black people, myself included, hoping to boost their own reputations. When I heard that Biden had cowed to segregationists, that was all I needed to hear. There were other women, including white women, on the ballot, and there was no need for this power-hungry bigot who built his reputation on the backs of black people to be anywhere near the ballot. By the way, that goes for Bernie Sanders as well, who has built his reputation on a photograph of him being arrested with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I have yet to see a successful campaign of a black candidate where the primary evidence of their engagement was an arrest photo taken decades before running for president. Sanders has not consistently uplifted black people once he got his power, and I would never trust someone who built their reputation on my efforts who then failed to offer the same efforts to uplift me. Ironically, by that time, my Decipher City colleague was pointedly demonstrating willingness to use proximity to blackness to lift her existence while refusing to do the same. So no, words of support do not matter when power is at stake. His platforms were based on college and housing, but in ways that continue to feed the same post-World War II narrative that the United States has been coasting with for decades, which would continue to primarily be beneficial to white people and no one else. Elizabeth Warren was on the ballot, and if I still believed in the electoral process, I would have been excited to see a ticket with her and Kamala Harris. Also, a black queer colleague in Florida was pro-Warren, and with that endorsement, I knew that I was on the right path. Warren had a recent reputation for being pointedly anti-oligarchy, so in my mind, she would have helped create and enforce legislation demanding that the wealthy participate in the public process. This would also redeem the populations that had voted against Hillary Clinton. There would be a chance at meaningful change. I wanted Kamala Harris to serve as Warren's vice president because although I knew very little about her, I figured that with her experience, she would be able to to make meaningful changes in the judiciary, especially when pressured by people who saw her as a cop. Moreover, since the vice president usually runs after the president completes his cycle, whether one term or two, I would have been interested in seeing what the two of them would accomplish. Someone else in my state was running to be a federal senator, and I had complete reservations about her since she was involved with an organization that I had found to be demonstrably racist at the time. Once she invited me to lunch to strategize her election process, and I asked her if she was sure she wanted to run. When she confirmed her desire, I encouraged her to talk to 3 woman-led black organizations, not just 3 black women, and asked them if she should run. I was not surprised by her arrogance in thinking that she could go from basically unknown in Austin to holding a federal seat, because that is the pride of the dominant narrative. Unsurprisingly, she did not win, although the organization canvassed many people on her behalf. 2020 was, ironically, the same year that Senator Kirk Watson ran away from an undisclosed scandal to rebuild his reputation with the University of Houston's Hobby School of Public Affairs. In March 2020, Biden was announced as the winner of the Texas primary, and I was so disgusted. Obviously, Texans were excited about an old segregationist, but when I saw that people were too obsessed with the proximity to blackness and sexist, I was done with the process. Throughout the rest of his campaign, Biden spent the rest of his time demanding that everyone honor his power grab while he told all of the elites that nothing would change. He had the nerve to tell black people that we were confused about our identity if we chose someone else, affirming that he felt entitled to the presidency because he worked with Barack Obama, who remains popular. Yes, Biden made the promise of forgiving student loans, but the fact that the majority of that happened only at the end of his presidency, and only so that he would look good for reelection, makes his candidacy abhorrent to me. Like Lincoln, if he could have avoided forgiving student loans, he would have, and based on his behavior, he would have felt no remorse. Additionally, the interest paid on student loans by struggling graduates made it even worse during the pandemic. When November came around, I was thoroughly sick of how hearing Biden was supposed to be some beacon on a hill for black people based on his decision of Kamala Harris as his running mate. After all, this was the same as the Obama-Biden duo. Yes, society allowed for a black individual to run for office, but only under the guidance of the people who the United States really believes should be in charge. After the results were called for Biden, I remember being attacked when I started a sentence with, at least, with my black roommate being horribly vile by saying I was always negative and never had anything positive to say. I left the room crying, saying I was going to say, at least something good happened and I didn't have to do it. Why are you always so mean to me? This obsession with old white people representing anything good for black people when the black people are offered supporting roles is obnoxious in the black community, and it has not resulted in positive change. What we saw in 2020 was a bunch of performative nonsense that was purely about egos and had nothing to do with change. Why else did rioters feel empowered to storm the Capitol? For those who worship protests, I was literally marching for Brown versus Board on April 1st, 2003, and 20 years later, I saw the end of affirmative action. That is what power thinks of protests. People never even learn the difference between protests and rioters, although my roommate explained the difference. Insurance coverage. If there is a protest, then property insurers are required to pay. But if something is labeled as a riot, insurance companies have no such obligations. The coverage calling the protests riots made a lot more sense when I learned that fact. The result of the 2020 protest was a seething resentment plastered under this delusion. I just want to be able to performatively emote while lying about my intentions to stop exploiting, harassing, and violating you. Why is that so wrong?